As above, so below, as within, as without. Welcome to Wheel of Ezekiel Astrology Podcast, Episode 6, The Venus Cycle. I'm joined here today by astrologer Fiona Aedgar. Her and I are going to discuss the Venus synodic cycle, as well as the upcoming Venus retrograde. So Fiona, welcome. How have you been?
Thanks. I'm fine. Yeah, I'm doing good. Happy Valentine's Day to everyone. Perfect day
Right?
to discuss Venus.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Happy Valentine's, and Friday too, the day of Freya. Right. So
Yes.
very interesting very interesting how the synchronicities all come about because we had planned this for earlier and it just didn't work out. But then today actually turns out to be a much more fitting day to do it. So
Yeah.
amazing how that all works. Well, let's see, Fiona. People that maybe don't know who you are, maybe you want to introduce yourself better than I could. I know that
Sure.
you've been practicing from astrology since about 2013 or so, right? A couple years.
I've been professional since 2013.
Okay.
I've been studying astrology for 25 years, maybe more now.
All right.
Oldest sister bought a book on rising signs, from then I was hooked. And
Hmm.
it's just probably like my number one passion in life when I'm not teaching or doing readings for clients. I'm thinking about astrology, dreaming about astrology. You know
Yes.
how you know how it goes.
I mean, last night I couldn't sleep. I'm always just playing with something in my mind, and I mean, it's probably why I'm always sleep deprived. Probably is because I'm always thinking about something that makes me want to get up and look something up because I just, thought about some connection. I want to look at some chart because I just thought about some correlation between a different chart, and I just have to make sure about a degree or something. I know it's the obsession of a true astrologer that I think really,
Hmm.
it never stops. It's just the work is continuing because it's probably the most endlessly fascinating subject I've ever encountered. Because
Same.
it pertains to absolutely everything, as much as people don't realize it. Pretty much everything in life has something to do with astrology. It's just expressing itself in the physical world that we
Hmm.
all, you know, have our being in.
Yeah.
But well, to get into our subject today, though, beginning well with Venus, maybe we should do a brief introduction about the significations. Perhaps, what are the few of the essential things that Venus indicates, rules, represents in astrology, Fiona?
Venus rules love, pleasure,
Mhm.
uh, enjoyment of life, manners, the
Mhm.
ability to find some connection with others. In modern astrology, she also has a connection with money. Well, it's Mercury in traditional astrology. Uh,
Well, because she rules Taurus, which has to do with wealth and assets. So that's the connection there, right?
Precisely.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. So in a woman's chart, Venus represents how her self-esteem, how she feels about herself, what she needs in a relationship. In a guy's chart, it tends to be the woman that he's attracted to. He'll go for someone like his Venus.
Mhm.
My partner has Venus in Sag, and I'm quite Sagittarian. I'm foreign. I'm a bit of
Sure.
a wanderer. I love spirituality and that I
Hmm.
love to travel. What do you think?
Yeah. All those points. Though I believe that regardless of being a man or a woman, Venus still has a lot to do with one way, the way that one loves, the way one
Yeah.
romanticizes things, and also self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, there is, I heard this whole attribution that I don't know that even the partner is represented by one or the other. Like, well, I think the Venus just represents the partner or significant other in some way in any chart. Sometimes they say that Mars does in a woman's chart, but I think that's maybe something different. It could be, or it could be Jupiter perhaps as well. But going back to Venus, it's everything that's beautiful, everything that has some kind of aesthetic to it that makes us feel good. It's desire. It's harmony. It's unifying things. It's bringing things together, which is the opposite of Mars that cuts and severs.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
and just and beauty as well as not just the arts, but also natural beauty, just everything from the landscapes. I mean, Venus does rule the color green, so of course, all the greenery that we see in nature, that's all Venus expressing herself. Well, she's really all the colors, of course, but green is particularly has to do with fertility and vegetation.
Yes, fertility.
So,
I was just about to say that. Yeah.
yeah, right, very good. Okay, so that's a few of the basics. And then just also just state a few other things about Venus that are important. Essentials, Venus rules the sign of Taurus, which is a fixed earth sign. So that's the goddess in her um, earthly form, you could say, more physical, tangible. And then she also rules Libra, which is a cardinal air sign. So it's more of the celestial, you could say, because it's air. And that later we'll get into this. It might be a little bit premature to say that Venus has two aspects in her cycle as both the morning star and the evening star, and then each of these expresses one of these two forms of the goddess.
Yeah.
And then additionally, too, with dignity, I wanted to add Venus also has her exaltation in the sign of Pisces,
Mm-hmm.
which is a mutable water sign. And I mean that, and when you study astrology and the symbolism of the signs, you can see how all three of these fit her very well, but in just in different expressions, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
She has because planets and archetypes are very multifaceted.
Yes.
So therefore, that you could say that they're the actors, and then essentially the signs are like the stage set for where the actor is going to perform the specific scene, right?
Yeah.
And a whole year is moving through all 12 signs, which is going through all 12 scenes, which encapsulates a whole year. You could say it's one metaphor to understand it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But well,
Yeah.
okay,
And
very good.
Venus is going to be in Aries in this retrograde cycle and then into Pisces.
Correct. Right. Right. Just recently ingressed into Aries. Which I guess right now could be a good time to do this, just to give for our listeners that want to keep track of dates here, mark this on your calendar. Venus ingressed into Aries, where she's going to retrograde on this past February 4th. Venus will then actually station retrograde on March 1st at 10 degrees Aries. It might be March 2nd for some people, depending where they live, but let's go with March 1st. Uh, then Venus ingress back into Pisces, retrograde already, of course, is on March 27th, which will then conjunct Neptune right there at 29 degrees of Pisces. Venus will then station direct on April 12th at 24 Pisces, then re-ingress into Aries on April 30th, and then her shadow period will extend until May the 14th when she reaches 10 Aries, where she went retrograde. So the shadow period is just essentially the period of the zodiac that a planet has to cover that it backtracked, essentially, you could say. So it pretty much will end up back to where it started before it went retrograde, and then you consider that the shadow period being completed, and then a planet will continue moving forward into new degrees that it hadn't covered yet in its journey. And then also, March 23rd or 22nd for some people of 2025, you're coming up, is a very important date because that is the day of the Sun-Venus interior conjunction, which we'll explain what that means in a moment, at 2 degrees of Aries. So all those dates, mark those. I can maybe, no, they're there. I don't necessarily have to. We can maybe repeat this again later if it's there's time, but it's there for the listeners. But we can move
Yeah.
forward now. We can move
What
forward. Oh, go ahead.
just one more thing is that
Sure.
Rahu will conjunct Venus on the 23rd.
That's right, because Rahu's right there just moved into Pisces at the very end there, because the nodes always are going backwards against the grain of the rest of the planet, so it always will enter a sign at the end degrees. So Neptune and
Yeah.
Rahu, right, with Venus, all three of those. That's good note, a good thing to note
Yeah.
there.
The I mean, this Venus retrograde is connected to a lot of other things that are going on.
Hmm.
In March and April, there are a lot of astrological events that look pretty exciting, I want to
Hmm.
say.
Hmm.
Have you looked at the Venus retrograde chart?
Uh, I've looked at a few dates. I haven't necessarily looked at a chart that has all of that in one graphic, let's say. But I was following like where it's going to be, like looking up the dates and stuff. But I mean, if you have a graphic or something you would like to share, that might be helpful to
I
to
don't
visualize
have
it.
I don't have it here, but I was looking at it earlier, and the day that Venus goes retrograde, the moon is in Aries.
Okay.
And then
Okay.
we have um all of this stuff in Pisces. We've got Mercury conjunct Rahu.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Uh, it looks pretty challenging, I have to say. Now,
Mm-hmm.
Venus retrograde can be totally different on a personal level than it is on a global level. I just want to say that things can be
Yes.
happening globally that are insane. However, you're warm in your house. You know, you've got your pets around you. You've got everything's fine. So don't worry so much about that.
Mm-hmm.
But on a global level, I really think that we could be looking at some really significant events around this time. It's
Certainly.
just,
It's the beginning of the end, you could say, of the world as we've known it. I mean, people have been saying this for many years that the world's going to change, and certainly over the last 5 years it has. But I
mhm.
think that this marker point here in 2025, being the middle of this decade already, is the defining point, which will really be the black and white old world versus this world here. Almost like it's kind of
Yeah,
chilling. Almost, this just comes to mind right now. I watched the film Blade Runner 2049 not too long ago, which came out in 2017. I didn't realize this. And in this, they reference this blackout essentially that happened. So it's like the idea essentially of the world pre-blackout and post, the way we refer to the world as post COVID or pre whatever,
yeah,
or before the internet. It's like one of those marker points that defines the world or no, pre 9/11 or post 9/11 or something like that, like something of that caliber taking place
hmm
that yeah, I mean, people have been talking about these things, and it's not a fear monger. I think it's just really something to keep in mind that may be actually a reality we could be looking at of an actual power blackout, or maybe the internet, perhaps for temporarily being taken down and maybe wiped. So I mean, I always just because for things that you cherish and you love that you'd like to have, I guess I just encourage people, and I do this for myself. I already have begun is just to start downloading and collecting things that you'd like to have that may not be
yeah,
as readily available in the future,
that's
perhaps,
right.
if that were to be the case. I mean, Venus doesn't necessarily have a specific correlation on her own to an event like blackouts, but again, the planets all work together. Essentially,
Yes,
you can't just ever isolate one transit to or correlate it only to one event. You have to look at what Pluto's doing, what Neptune and
exactly.
Uranus, which are the outer planets that kind of demarcate more of the collective global things
Yeah,
that are
yeah,
taking place, whereas the inner planets are more personal, you could say. And they certainly have collective implications, especially when they're in hard aspects to the outer planets or with each other. Like we just recently in January saw the opposition of Pluto and Mars, which was
yeah,
very significant, right?
yeah.
Which I thought maybe was going to be worse than it was, but again, we always hope for the best, but
Well, we have
like,
that once more coming up. We have
exactly,
that
yes,
on the
it's
26th of March.
it's coming up again. Yep, yep.
Uh,
It's not done. There's several rounds of this. It's not done by a
it's
long shot.
not.
But that's what I'm
Yeah,
saying. 2025 is that year that we're going to see now that very, very defined leap post the old world, now to the new world really coming in to being also because Pluto is in Aquarius to stay now, which before it was
yes.
kind of going back and forth. So there was like little glimpses of what the new world was going to be, but now it's, the Capricorn era is done. Pluto's here now to work Aquarius for good.
Yeah,
So
and all of this goes back to the Jupiter Saturn conjunction in Aquarius. This
right in
that
20.
is that is
Mhm.
the event that kicked off this new world that we entered,
Mhm.
and everything is reflecting that. All of these, Pluto and Aquarius and Neptune's going to Aries and all of that. This
And then
is
Uranus and
all
Gemini.
Uranus and Gemini. Like
All
these
air
are
signs.
all just extra parts of that Jupiter Saturn conjunction because when those two come together, it's called a great conjunction.
Yes.
And they are
Hmm.
serious business. I
Hmm.
mean, look at the one that happened, or was it 2001 or 2002? It was in Taurus. And of course, we had 9/11, which literally changed the whole world's
Oh yeah.
perception of security forever.
Hmm.
It's never been the
Hmm.
same. So Aquarius is about technology,
Hmm.
and it's about freedom and it's
Hmm.
about humanity and social structures. That
Hmm.
that conjunction is just getting started.
Yes. Yep. And they'll only take place in air signs from here out for the next 100 years or I actually don't know exactly how long they each last. I don't have it off the top of my head, but previously being an earth sign, being the one you reference in Taurus, being very earth shattering. Now the whole realm is very much air. It's the intellect. It's very much the realm of ideas. Where even warfare may not be so much physical anymore, though of course it may. But it's definitely something
Yeah.
that's even on the internet. It's like cyber warfare. It's like
Hmm.
blackouts. It's like weaponizing the air element essentially through intellect,
That's
through
right.
ideas, through censoring speech or whatever it may be. It's essentially technology, of course, like you're saying, very technocratic. Uh,
Exactly. Yeah. And the attack on the nervous system, that's an Aquarian thing. And our
mm,
nervous systems are being fried all the time with radiation and EMFs and stress,
hmm
And the other thing that no one is talking about are these solar flares, which are
I've
having
heard
a,
you mention this. Yeah, right. Okay.
yeah, they are having a huge impact on people's emotional well-being,
Hmm.
mental health, your physical health, because
hmm
there was like a Russian scientist around the time of the Russian Revolution, and he did all of these studies and came up with all of this data that
hmm
solar storms affect people's mental health and they cause an
hmm
increase in cancer and they also cause heart attacks and strokes. Now, I
hmm
know what everyone's thinking. Oh, it's the old, could be that, but it could also be this because this guy, like, did all of these studies and proved that would happen. Of course,
hmm
the Bolsheviks put him in the gulag, but
hmm
you can still find his work on
hmm
online. So this is also going on in the background. Solar storms also have the potential to knock out entire power grids. There was the Carrington event. I can't remember the
hmm
year, like 1800s. That was catastrophic. And actually, if something similar to that happened today, goodbye technology, goodbye internet, all of
hmm
that, which I personally don't think is actually that bad at all. I mean, I'll miss it, but then they won't have us in this kind of technological gulag where they're seeing everything and you've got, digital IDs and digital currencies. So,
Yeah, yeah. No, they'll feel another way. And there's always, I mean, rebels that find ways to get around whatever the system is trying to impose. I mean, so even if it
yeah,
did go down, I feel like it would come back and there'd be people that find ways to get in to the internet in some other form that wasn't through the official, like
yeah.
smuggling any other thing that's ever been banned. Essentially,
Hmm.
there's always some underground network that arises. But anyway, that's a little bit off topic. So maybe to return to the Venus cycle, we
Yeah,
can eventually. I do definitely want to discuss outer planets and any of these other interesting sub, offshoots of all this because obviously it's interconnected and it's all very fascinating. But could you explain the Venus cycle just to eventually essentially have a basic understanding of it? And if I may also share a graphic I have on my screen here that
yeah,
shows the five-pointed star that Venus makes throughout her cycle. Let's see.
yeah,
That might be helpful to visualize this. I'm a very visual person myself too. So
sure.
let's see. All right, did I get the permission there? Let's see. Okay, let's see. Yes, here we go. All right.
Yeah,
You see that good? Okay.
yeah, beautiful pentagram, which is why the ancients used to have it everywhere, and the art and the walls. So,
hmm
yeah, so this Venus cycle then, there's an 18-month cycle. It kicks off when retrograde Venus aligns with the sun.
hmm
That's called an inferior conjunction, and that's the start of a new Venus cycle.
Right, that's the center one. It's so interior or inferior conjunction. Both refer to the same thing.
Yeah,
It's just yeah, right. That is when Venus is the closest to the Earth, I believe, right? Is
yes,
that right? Okay,
yes.
right. So that would
Uh,
be the center one we have right there. With
yeah.
with
Um, so then we have the rebirth of Venus.
mhm.
She turns into a morning star. Then we have the retrograde Venus turns direct. It's rising in the morning and it's visible as a morning star. So this is when its qualities are really visible to everyone on Earth. We're all experiencing those qualities, and it's focusing on relationships and our connections with others. Then direct Venus aligns with the sun, This is a superior conjunction. So that's like the peak of the cycle.
Hmm.
So then Venus, after that, Venus starts to become an evening star again. The evening star, the focus turns to, kind of inward, more introverted.
Hmm.
Um, so then evening star Venus turns red. It's a bit of a complicated cycle. I mean, if you're first learning astrology, it may not make any sense to you, but this is just explaining the kind of, I guess, the sacred geometry of the planet, which is really beautiful, actually. So then
Yes.
evening star Venus turns retrograde. She goes into the underworld, and there's a new cycle starting.
Hmm.
Um, so then after five of these cycles, she kind of returns to the same spot again, completing this rose pattern that you have displayed there. And that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
Yeah, right. And to kind of expound a little bit on it, um, Venus has her two expressions, being the morning star and the evening star, that have correlations to basically different modes, you could say. Like my understanding is that Venus, the evening star, is more the love goddess, which has more to do with Libra, you could say. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
you could look at that in that sense. Whereas the morning star, or Venus Phosphorus, Venus Lucifera, you could also say the light bringer, which is then associated with Lucifer, has more to do with Venus and her warrior goddess aspect, which is somewhat akin to Athena or the Babylonian goddess Ishtar, is my
Mm-hmm.
understanding. Kind of that archetype more so. Um, is there, let's see, then, right. Her cycle takes about a total of 19 months, is my understanding, the Venus synodic cycle, which is about the equivalent of 584 days. Um, with which then she will have her conjunction with the sun about every 9.2 months, give or take. So either the inferior conjunction or the um, exterior conjunction. So having to,
Mm-hmm.
always the interior conjunction or inferior conjunction. I've been calling it interior because it's the graphic on the inside. Always happens when Venus is retrograde, whereas when she's direct, it's always um, the exterior one, the one it's more like up high. It's like so basically when she's closer to the Earth, it's like more grounded. It's like I said, it's more correlated to Taurus. Whereas the one that where she's further away, the exterior one has more to do with where she's up in the sky, up in the air, actually very, very kind of high above. That has more to do with Libra, maybe with the intellect, and maybe
Yeah, the
the, you know
Aries
yeah,
side of Venus.
the creative side, yeah, right. I mean, which is sometimes the stereotypical side of Venus that people don't only seem to associate with her, but she has this other warrior side as well, which
Oh,
is
she
interesting
does.
because
Yeah,
she's entering Mars' sign of Aries, which is the sign of the warrior. So it's particularly pertinent to this cycle. So maybe you want to talk a little bit now about Venus in Aries, and then this whole Venus retrograde cycle beginning in Aries, then
sure.
going back to Pisces and kind of getting into that. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, well,
right.
the first thing I want to mention is that, that when it comes to goddesses, um, in recent years, you see a lot of the stuff about, oh, the dark goddess. Come to this dark goddess workshop and, channel your inner dark god. They all have a dark side.
Yes.
They're not just a bunch of, they're not just laying on a chair eating grapes all day. Like they're goddesses of war, and love, and you
Mm,
don't want to mess with them. It's kind of like a lioness. They're sweet and playful until they're not. So it's the same with the goddesses. So
mhm,
when we have Venus in Aries, Aries of course is ruled by Mars, which is a masculine warrior planet. So this is when Venus becomes like super full on, fiery, more masculine, pursuing pursuing very strongly whatever it is that she wants.
mhm,
And I think particularly women would actually struggle with that in their charts because they have no problem going after what they want, but they have a more masculine approach. It's
mm,
terribly unfashionable these days to talk about things like that, but I'm 44, so I didn't grow up with all of that woke stuff. So yeah, it's hard for them. She becomes the battle, the ferocious, the lioness with the blood around her mouth after eating the antelope.
Hmm.
So in a transit, of course, we all become a little bit more like that. She reflects what's going on collectively.
Would you say it has to do with fighting for a cause in
It
this
can
case?
be. It absolutely can be.
Fighting for love, you could even say. I mean, kind of ironically, there's the fighter and the lover, but in this case, the lover now has to become the fighter to preserve what it is that she loves.
Yeah,
Kind of that could be an ongoing theme. So there's
yeah,
this there's kind of the stereotype that during retrogrades or Venus retrogrades, particularly because of her relation to love and relationships, that oftentimes relationships end, or that there's a lot of breakups, or at least revision of relationships. Can you speak to a little bit about the significations of the retrograde and certain expressions or manifestations it can have in interpersonal relationships, or just even on the collective?
sure. Yeah, I mean, well, first I want to say that like it doesn't necessarily mean that all or even most people will experience that. There
No.
must be something, other things going on in your composite chart with your partner.
Hmm.
But yes, Venus retrograde is a time when you might feel like the pleasure and the love and the romance are less available
Hmm.
than normal, and it can be for any reason, including perhaps your partner's working more than usual, they have other responsibilities, you're just not
Hmm.
available around that time. You have to make a bit more extra effort during Venus retrograde to ensure the smooth running of your relationship. But as
Right.
far as breakups go, well, people from the past are more likely to return during a retrograde. You always hear about people's exes showing up over retrogrades, and well, why don't you just
Yes.
don't answer the email? Like you don't have to engage with them.
All
If
right.
these people are showing up every retrograde for you, then perhaps you have poor boundaries.
Hmm.
So take some
Right.
responsibility instead of blaming Venus for all of your woes.
No,
But
all right. Well, planets aren't causes, anyways. They're indicators. So
yeah,
they're indicators of things like potentially an ex contacting you, which maybe there's a good reason. So maybe it's not to just shut it out entirely, but with
yeah,
discernment, engage with what's appropriate, and maybe actually that it's coming back, or the partner's coming back to sort of heal certain. I'm talking about more in a more positive sense, heal
yeah,
something that maybe got left. Kind of not totally settled before. And maybe
mm-hmm,
even if years have gone by, maybe it's a way to make peace to then maybe have a more peaceful break afterwards. Because
yeah,
maybe it was a very sudden and abrupt ending that you weren't able to talk things out. But maybe it's a way to settle that, and then when Venus moves direct, then that the amends are made. I mean, I guess I like to
yeah,
think more on the positive sense.
yeah,
I mean, it could be an ex trying to come back and destroy your life because they just, I don't know, they're psychotic and they have nothing else better to do. And however it's hitting their chart, they're feeling the need to lash out and be aggressive, and they want to project onto you. And that's, of course, is another very, very possible way that that could manifest. You have to look at
yeah,
your own chart to see what's going on, what house it's falling in, and what aspects and other transits you're undergoing yourself. Astrology is very nuanced. There's many layers. So by no
oh
means take
yeah,
one transit like this and just assume that just putting that out there for people that are new to astrology, they may
yes,
hear about these things. It's uh it's very layered. So don't be frightened ever if you hear something like that. There's always mitigating things too. I mean, Jupiter thankfully is direct now. Uh
mm-hmm,
and we'll very soon also be moving into Cancer, which we can maybe discuss later. I don't mean to get off track, but I'm just
sure,
throwing that out there that there are very positive transits also coming
yeah,
this year.
yeah,
Positive shifts, like a lot of planets are changing signs, which is another reason why the energies are going to be felt as shifting. The astrology is indicating this to us, that there's going to
mm-hmm,
be major shifts with all these archetypes shifting into new signs. So essentially, the actors are moving into another stage set. So obviously, things are going to look different. They're going to feel different. It's going to be a new world.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
right, yeah.
Mhm.
And just to go back to what we were saying about relationships, sometimes if
Yeah.
a relationship does break up, you can look
Hmm.
back on the Venus retrograde periods that kind of preceded the breakup. And,
Mm.
retrogrades are about reviewing. Do I
Hmm.
want this? Do I not? What's working for me? What isn't?
Hmm.
So quite often you'll look back and there was a Venus retrograde, and that's when you really started to think, is this what I want?
Hmm.
But there has to be a bunch of other stuff going on in your chart and your partner's chart for a breakup.
Yeah, and that's curious you say that, because I mean I believe it's 2023, one of the last ones, at least the one that was most personal. it went retrograde like basically right on my ascendant in Leo. So I have my ascendant at 20, 21 degrees of Leo, roughly. So the retrograde there, that was a summer, the summer of 2023, if I'm not mistaken. Um, there was a very much of a reflection time, as you're saying. Oftentimes also reflection of self, of self-value, of what one actually stands for, like one's own way that one wants to present themselves in the world. Just an example of it, if it was to fall in your first house, let's say, it's going to be extremely personal in that case. So with this Aries one that's coming up now for people that are Aries rising or maybe have their sun or moon in Aries, it's going to
Hmm.
be more much more punctuated. There's going to be the
Yes.
exclamation mark because it's so much closer to a more personal placement. Or let's say it's even happening close to your natal Venus. That's another possibility that you would feel that
Hmm.
a little more strongly. Granted, taking into consideration the house as well, because I mean the seventh house transits too for let's say Libra risings, having it fall into. I'm talking whole sign house here for people that
Hmm.
use Placidus, it maybe it'll vary depending on what sign falls in what house, but just to be kind of more straightforward, I use
Yeah.
the whole sign, so that would make Libra risings the seventh house be Aries, so that's a much more pronounced place for that to fall, let's say, than any other place. Or even the fifth house, you could say, even though the fifth house isn't so much about committed relationships, but it definitely has a lot to do with love and expression, and children too. So it may actually have to do with your relationship to your children. For another example of another way, it doesn't have to do necessarily with a romantic partner. It can have to do with your relationships with many people. I mean, even your
Hmm.
parents, it could be, right? Or another relative or a close friend or anyone really that you have some kind of love bond with, essentially. Because
Exactly. Yeah. Now, I think that these transits are always going to affect the angular houses the
hmm
most. That's where you'll feel it most potently. Like even your fourth house, if you
hmm
have Venus retrograde going through there, you might have some aesthetical problems with your home,
hmm
or you could have something that's really spoiling the enjoyment of your home life, such as noise or, cold or something like that.
hmm
Going through the 10th house, you're going to
hmm
be having some review period with work. Maybe you're bored,
hmm
maybe you don't feel valued enough.
hmm
That kind of
something
thing.
something more public, which is, then again,
Yeah.
in terms of significations that Venus retrograde tends to bring up, I wrote down a couple things, and one of them that would pertain to public life is scandals. Oftentimes,
Yeah.
Venus disrupts a lot of the social norms. So I'm just read
Yeah.
off a few things that Venus retrograde can signify. It can signify, like you already said, the past, women in particular, artistic movements which return. So it could be music or certain films that maybe you go back and watch that you used to watch that meant a lot. So it's kind of a very nostalgic kind of period. Like
Mm-hmm.
I, for myself, found myself that summer when it was in Leo, going back and listening to music that I hadn't listened to since I was maybe like 15, 16, or maybe even to my early 20s.
Yeah.
I don't know, but just stuff on YouTube I found that I used to watch all the time, like old live concerts of different artists I really love, um, or certain movies too that you hadn't seen in forever that you used to watch all the time. That was a favorite that you even forgot about, and then you just watch it. And it's just like kind of reliving the past in a way in that
Yeah.
moment through fantasy, through kind of Venusian things.
Yeah.
Uh, So artistic movements, identity, self-esteem, selfish love is another
Yeah.
thing, or selfishness, learning to love yourself, provocative behavior, as Venus can be the provocateur in this
Oh,
phase.
yeah. She can. Yeah.
Yep, yep. Revising social norms. So this is more of a collective one of society revising what is socially acceptable in terms of manners and what the collective deems to be appropriate
But
or not.
that's happening right now.
Right, it already is. Yeah, but so
Yeah.
this retrograde is probably going to solidify that a little bit more, where it's slowly been easing its way in, or not even as slowly, but maybe now it's going to be much more abrupt, and who knows
Yeah.
how
Because
that's actually going to play out. But
if we look at the woke
well,
stuff, it's really like people have had enough of that.
that's
And it's,
fading now. Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, but
Or
it's becoming more acceptable to say no to that stuff.
mhm.
Whereas what, 6 months ago, you couldn't. So
Yep.
those social graces and social norms are kind of like they're changing.
Yeah, which just comes to mind. That may have had something to do with the nodes just now shifting or finishing the transits through Aries and Libra, which you're speaking now. So Libra has a lot to do with social mannerisms, or what's socially acceptable, having finished and now being out of Libra, maybe completing that. And it was the South node, which has to do with decrease. Perhaps that was a signification to a decrease in all of these very kind of distasteful, non-traditional
Yeah,
things that were disrupting even the whole balance in polarity in terms of relationships. I mean,
that's right.
the pleasant things that Libra rules that were essentially corrupted and perverted by all of
Mm-hmm.
this ideology, which can
Mm-hmm.
swing either way. Now we could have a very extreme, if you could say that's extreme left, I'm seeing the pendulum is swinging now to the far right almost. You could say on some level, it's definitely good that things are balancing out. The pendulum definitely needed to swing back the opposite direction it had been going. I'm very much about balance. I don't believe in polarizing one way or another. I see there's evil in both. Essentially, evil isn't one or the other. It's essentially just being out of balance one way or the other. You're in balance out to the left, or you're out of balance out to the right. Either way, you're still out of balance. So hopefully, this is a more of a pendulum, maybe centering and actually regaining equilibrium, which is what Libra is about.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe Venus being able to express that a little bit better, being retrograde in the opposite sign. Talk a little bit about that. What does it mean when Venus is retrograde in a sign for the opposite sign? Like being that she's essentially able to see that sign directly. If there's some kind of grace or blessing, perhaps, that is able to be, I don't know, accessed through that access polarity there.
Do you
You
mean
know,
for Libra people?
or just yeah, or no, one necessarily Libra people, but for the Libra energy on the collective, let's say. Um, I guess I'm kind of riffing off something I recently heard Vic Takara speak about. He made a post about this. He was talking about dignity, like when a planet is, let's say, in poor dignity
Oh
in a
yeah,
sign.
yeah,
If you look straight across from it, there's the kind of the blessing that maybe at least for the house that's across from it that is able to be blessed
yeah,
because of being able to be seen directly, or maybe even make an opposition, which is not necessarily a negative thing,
yeah,
or some kind of mutual exchange between the two houses in some way, or
yeah.
signs in this case, Libra Aries.
Well, we can get strength from that Libra house, that's for sure. So
Hmm.
whatever house Venus is retrograding in your own birth chart, you can take a look at the Libra house. For
Hmm.
me, it's my fifth house. I have Libra,
Mm,
and I've got a
okay.
stellium of planets there.
Hmm.
So I'm going to be being really creative this Venus retrograde and doing a lot of stuff, probably working on myself, spending time with my stepson,
Hmm.
fifth house activities. So yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
You can gain strength from that opposite house, which is actually a thing with a lot of astrology transits.
I've noticed that mirror effect through a lot of different transits, are actually more so pronounced with natal perfection houses, or they're called annual perfections, where
Yeah.
each year of your life you're working through a specific house. This only works for whole sign house. So
Mm-hmm.
I found this to be very true. When I was working through a house, oftentimes I'd see expressions of the house opposite of it reflected, almost like it's peering in, it's mirroring its significations into the house perfection that you're in.
Yeah.
So if you're having a fifth house perfection, you're a lot of 11th house stuff as well that has to do more with groups, society, some say hopes, wishes, more collective things can
Mm-hmm.
also peer into your fifth house of creativity, of self-expression, romance, children. Perhaps you get involved with your children, or your children get involved in some kind of group thing. I mean, that could be just a very literal thing. And now with Venus transiting through there, retrograde, maybe, I'm speaking, very much just as an example, like I'm speculating here. For
I
example,
think
like
I think you're on the right track for sure, and it's definitely
yeah,
helps
right.
because it's a
We're
complete
think
system. We
Mhm.
can't have just have one sign by itself becomes like a whole thing when you look at the other sign.
I look at signs in pairs. They're axes. There's 12 signs, or there's six pairs. I have to look at them as six pairs because they complement each other. As much as you can say they're opposites, they're also complementary opposites. They complete each other essentially. So in
Yes.
this case, we're talking about Libra Aries. You could study them separately, but it helps a lot more, and you gain a lot more insights when you study them together, and you see how they play off each other essentially.
Yeah.
Which is why the nodes are always in opposite signs, because they're working together, Rahu and Ketu. They're never ever going to be separate. They're always at 180 degrees moving together through the zodiac. Uh, so anyway, that's that's good for that in terms of significations. What else did I wanted to ask you here? Well, did you have any good Venus retrograde anecdotes you'd want to share? I mean, you don't have to, but if you had like a good story or a good example to illustrate this,
Hmm.
either in your life or someone else's life, or a client, you don't have to, of course, say who, but
Yes, I can use an example from my own life. And actually, I was thinking about this today. Retrograde periods are an opportunity to get back on the right track,
okay,
right?
yes.
So
Hmm.
we all have individual lives. We all have birth charts that are unique to us. And that birth
Hmm.
chart will describe like a path or a destiny or a fate, in life. And
Hmm.
when we get really off track and we're wandering around in the darkness, a retrograde can bring us back into alignment again, which can be
Hmm.
rough, but ultimately is going to be for your greater good. Now, 2017 is the last time that Venus was retrograde in Aries. So I was looking back on my what happened that year. And actually, I had a really big career breakthrough then
Okay.
as an astrologer.
Hmm.
So it's definitely not something to fear because you can have a lot of good stuff that comes afterwards. Because
Hmm.
when Venus goes retrograde in Pisces, it's actually in my 10th house.
Hmm. Right. Public life, career, right. All
Yeah.
those things, right.
So moving from Aries to Pisces, it moves across my 11th and my 10th houses.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit because the retrograde doesn't take place in one sign in this case. In some cases, maybe it does, but this particular one, like I said, it begins in early Aries at 10 degrees, so only the first decan, and then we'll re-enter Pisces, like I said, on the 12th of April. Or sorry, no, 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 my bad. 27th of March is the day that Venus re-enters, and then she will conjunct Neptune. So that's part of it too. We could have that tie in that the conjunction with Neptune and Rahu. Speak to that, the fact that for the Pisces leg of the retrograde, what particularly because it conjoins Neptune and Rahu, what would you say that the significations or the implications of that for both the collective or on an individual level, let's say?
The thing that stands out most to me about that is the United States, because the United States has an angle at
Hmm.
in Pisces.
Okay. Okay.
In that chart, the
The Sibley
fourth of
chart.
yeah, the
Yeah.
Sibley charts.
Right, Cancer rising or
Yes.
Sagittarius. Sorry, Sagittarius rising. Sagittarius rising. Right, with the Cancer sun. Right. I could probably pull it up actually to have it on screen here.
Yeah. So the angle is the IC is at 25 degrees of Pisces. Now, that to me speaks of something really big happening in the United States around that time.
Hmm.
So I mean, March 14th, we have an eclipse in Virgo, and
Okay.
it looks
Right.
like
Right.
it's a difficult one because it's opposite Saturn. Then we have the events in April. We've got Rahu conjunct Saturn, we've got Venus conjunct Rahu, and then we've got the Mars Pluto opposition. Like these all speak to me of a large event happening in the United States
Hmm.
because it's on that angle. And also Saturn is like inching towards that angle. It's not going to be long until it crosses it, which is a huge deal. Now, what exactly is it going to be? I don't know because astrology, not fortune telling, as I always say, but it's going to be significant. On a personal level, you could have some challenges in relationships that actually lead to something really good afterwards, working through. You could break through some illusions, you could break through some kind of fantasies that are holding you back.
Okay.
It's really good for any artists or musicians or writers or filmmakers. Your creative juices are really going to be flowing here. You can make some amazing stuff around this time.
Yes, that's very true. Pisces being the exaltation of Venus too, she's kind of regains her dignity. Well, does even though she's retrograde when she re-enters Pisces.
Hmm.
So that's always a positive thing, I'd say, even if she's retrograde.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
I think
that,
retrogrades, on a personal level, retrogrades tend to be better when they are in domicile or exalted.
hmm.
It's when they leave
Right,
that status that everything
right.
goes to
So,
shit.
right, it may be the more pleasant side of the retrograde will be when she re-enters Pisces, and that's maybe the period. I'm again speculating of where things maybe begin to get figured out a little bit better. Amends are made, and then you can move forward when back into Aries, and maybe things will become again a little bit shaky again, or well, not shaky, but maybe that you have to kind of tough out whatever things were negotiated before, because maybe it's like reality hits again. It's like a test, you could say, almost of Venus once she re-enters Aries. Of course, once she turns direct and clears her shadow, then and it's over. Then that's the longest test of having endured all of that.
Yeah.
But anyway, here's the Sibley chart. I mean, what you were speaking to with the angles. Let's see, Pisces. Um, what was the specific? Because from what I'm seeing here, the moon actually is in Pisces in the U.S. Sibley chart here. 27. Sorry, no, no, sorry, I'm saying it's Aquarius.
It's
Sorry, 27,
Aquarius.
27 Aquarius. I knew that because actually there was an interesting. Was it full moon or new moon earlier this year? Okay, it's the angle. It's the fourth house, right? So that's to do with home,
Yeah.
right? Right, right. With what you're saying. Okay. And then opposite to that, Virgo, right? So, which is where the nodes are. Also, very interesting. Just the new nodal shift, how that's going to play into
Mm.
this. Do you want
Yeah.
to do you want to speak a little bit to the conjunction that Venus will be making with Rahu, maybe in context to the Sibley chart, or just
Yeah.
in general, and then also Neptune, right?
Well, yeah. So Rahu is also called the North Node,
Hmm.
and they kind of symbolize like this head of the dragon, and then there's the body of the dragon, and they've become, sliced in half, and one is they're fighting for dominance. So
Right.
K2, which is the South Node, it's about releasing. It's
Hmm.
about an area of where you have expertise. It's a comfort zone. You know everything that's present there. So
Hmm.
you kind of want to go towards Rahu. It's like this uncharted territory. You've never been there. It's going
Hmm.
to be like a fabulous adventure. You're going to learn a bunch of stuff, but
Hmm.
it can become an area of obsession.
Because it's the
And
hungry beast. It's a hungry ghost. It continues to eat and devour things, but it never gets satisfied because it doesn't have really a stomach. Everything just it's a severed head essentially, right? It
yes,
doesn't. It doesn't. With this, oftentimes I've noticed in placements of people that have it near certain angles that there's kind of that whole very devourous nature, obsessive nature, where they can never satisfy or satiate themselves in a specific area, perhaps, or there's
that's
that.
right. That's
Which,
right.
mm-hmm,
You have to be careful because it can get out of control
mm-hmm,
easily. So like I don't know, Rahu conjunct Venus and Pisces could be maybe some people are drawn to getting like extreme forms of plastic surgery or altering their appearance in some way. But I mean, women are doing that now. Everyone wants
mm-hmm.
to change the way that they look, and it can
Right, but
become grotesque and distorted when Rahu is involved. Like that woman that turned herself into a cat, basically, like she was so stretched and
hmm
that's just one possibility. Don't get surgery or Botox or anything like that when Venus is retrograde because you won't
no,
like
yeah,
the results.
no.
Um,
Well,
but sorry to go off on a tangent. I've got
no, no.
Gemini rising.
That's a very very good point. It speaks to something I was reading about that a lot these surgeries, these plastic surgeries, that I mean they're not natural because you're altering the way you look from how it's natural. It's I mean the motivation I see with people even wanting to do it in the first place all has to do with trauma essentially and some kind of lack of self-esteem and self-value that you feel you have to actually go under the knife to change the way you look. But the body doesn't necessarily recognize an attack as being something that's been consented to and coordinated. It's going under
Hmm.
surgery like that. There is a very even if subconscious trauma to the body that it suffers and stores. I mean, of course, you're not conscious of it because you're under anesthesia. You're not even conscious that it's happening. But ultimately, a person will never be the same. Obviously, both physically and how they look, but also the psyche, the emotions, the body itself will remember that. And it's not a good thing, especially now we're looking at with increase the idea of excess and potentially even some kind of mania with that because
Yeah,
again, this is I'm stating this not at all as a general thing, but just something I've noticed that I actually learned from Victor Kara, studying a lot of his work. He goes through different profiles of charts, and it has noted, particularly with serial killers, that oftentimes they always have K2 or Rahu and the moon in very close conjunction.
Mm-hmm.
That's always like this like signature placement that is seen. Granted, that doesn't mean to anybody that does. So if you're listening to this and you happen to have your moon close to K2 or Rahu, I'm not saying that that's what that means. There are other factors playing into it. But just
Yeah.
the fact that you look at enough charts throughout your life as an astrologer, you begin to see certain patterns. So what are the
Mm-hmm.
odds that certain, that serial killers in particular have had this placement? So there's something about the mind not being well when it's too close to
Yeah.
K2. Like there's this mania, this kind of excess, this way of acting out in a way that's not, that's not sane. It's not healthy. The moon is very afflicted in that sense because it's so hungry, it's constantly trying to feed itself and fill itself, and it's just not able to. It's this futile attempt to reach and to fill a void essentially that just can't be filled. So
Yeah.
there's that there. So put Venus there. I mean, it's kind of that whole chase for what you perceive to be beauty, for what you perceive to be, pleasure or whatever's going to fulfill that part of yourself that you maybe feel is lacking. That's on a negative, perhaps on a collective level. We'll have to see really how that actually plays out. I'm hoping not, of course, but uh, how about with Neptune? Being that Neptune also has to do with illusion, it's very kind of similar and kind of plays into this or ties into this whole theme pretty well. That Neptune dissolves, so it dissolves our perceptions of reality.
Mm-hmm.
It dissolves, well,
Sanity.
yeah, sanity. It just it's the dream, right? But it's the dream that can go into delusion. So it's just find a dream and to fantasize and to have like great pursuits and wonderful visions of things you want to create. Like if you're an artist and you live in that world, Neptune can be very, very good for you.
Yeah.
You can utilize it, or it can, let's say, it can indicate artistic talent, especially if it's conjunct Venus or something, or in a very good or trine, let's say, to Venus. But it also can mean that you're always just wanting to live in that world and you're never grounded in reality. Essentially, you trade off your 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 whole existence essentially from being, grounded in the practical, having to deal with day-to-day things that maybe aren't things that we all want to deal with, but are necessities. That's the Saturn principle, which again, we can maybe touch on the whole Saturn Neptune conjunction at 0 degrees Aries, which is
Mm-hmm.
very, very intriguing to me, being that they're polar opposite significations, these two massive planets that are moving in practically within the same time period. Uh, but anyway, just stick to the Neptune bit. My question is, what do you see? What do you see with that? What do
With
you see with that?
Neptune conjunct Venus?
Yeah, I mean, Neptune's role in this whole retrograde with the conjunction happening there. Does that make sense? Uh,
Yeah. I think there are a number of different things going on. Like the first one is like the medical astrology aspect of it, which is
okay.
like everyone's got cancer, you know. I don't know what it's like where you are, but we're like, well, where I'm from in Ireland, every second person has cancer.
Hmm.
You know, the rates are off the charts. So that's a Piscean, that's a Neptunian thing. Neptune is always present in medical astrology where the person has cancer. So
With
that's,
disease. Okay.
yeah,
Particularly cancer. Okay.
particularly cancer because Neptune dissolves boundaries and cancer spreads throughout the body like a fungus. It's
Right,
not
right.
contained to one place. So
Hmm. Hmm.
there's that. On another level, you have to be very careful about relationships at this time. You
Hmm.
have to be careful about fantasies and falling for someone that is, completely unsuitable. Speaking to
That's
the woman of your dreams over Instagram, then you actually find out
right.
she's some dude from like Nigeria. You know
Yeah.
that.
With AI, everything is possible. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it
That
is.
that's what
Yeah.
I was speaking to with massive deceptions having to do with Venetian things. So it could even be things with money, like getting scammed or having being led on some kind of I don't know, something that seems better or too good to be true, which then sadly turns out to be too good to be true.
Yeah, like
Uh,
catfishing, catfishing.
yeah, well, there's of course a lot of these phishing scams that are all over the internet that that people unfortunately fall for. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the movie Beekeeper with Jason Statham. It has to do with that. essentially like it's like well organized phishing schemes, like an actual big building towers. That, people that are very 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 wealthy maybe that fund them. I don't know how. I mean, I don't know how much on fact that film was based on, but just the idea of that, that there actually are like, people that's their full-time job. That's what they dedicate themselves to, essentially, to scamming people,
Oh
however
yeah.
they can get their information. So Neptune being all about deception in very clever ways, and Venus having to do with money and resources, combine the two right there in conjunction, pretty much to the degree with Rahu, which we just explained the significations of Rahu being kind of excess in this whole kind of manic um, expression, essentially. You know, combine those three things, and that's one of the potential outcomes you get with
Hmm.
all that. So something is just to be mindful of, and to not fall for,
Don't
to
fall
be
for scams. Yeah. Don't fall
especially
for
vigilant.
people, pretending to be your dream woman, like over social media.
Or
Don't cheat on your wife. Keep your wits about you. If you
Mhm.
need escapism, watch Lord of the Rings.
Okay, yeah, right.
Get a pizza or drink a bottle of wine, whatever. Just try and kind of moderate it a bit because that can be very extreme. It's like a zombie head,
Hmm.
Rahu. It's kind of like, devour, eat, don't think. So it
Yeah, it's
can,
a weapon.
yeah,
Another thing that just came to mind, being that Pisces, one of the significations that rules is empathy. I could see this as weaponized empathy. The way that people know, you can weaponize pretty much any emotion, and oftentimes, good people, their fall comes not through vices, but through their virtues. Their virtues being used against them. So a person that's very empathetic, that maybe actually is a sun in Pisces or Pisces rising or moon, let's say, uh, particularly those very personal placements. I could see this potentially with Neptune, Venus, and Rahu all in Pisces, some kind of dynamic forming around empathy being used to use you to exploit you, or a native, let's say, not you, but just any well, not you're not even a person that has that placement, but just even on a collective level, maybe
yeah,
empathy, some kind of narrative being spun that's all about the
yeah.
people or about these poor victims essentially that need your help or whatever. But oftentimes
Hmm.
that's just to create, essentially they've even created the problem in order to offer a solution, and essentially it's almost a way of trapping you, essentially leading you into this specific corner they want you in, because they know they can pull on people's heartstrings on a certain, they say the right things, put up the right images, and there you go. You have this massive propaganda based off empathy, which is really false empathy. It's not at all. Any emotion out of balance, whether it's even if it's meant with a good intention, like I'm not against being empathetic. I think we should definitely be empathetic and helpful to people if we can. But even that out of moderation becomes evil, because it becomes anything that's out of balance, out of equilibrium becomes evil. Essentially, whether it's, you know, it, anything can be used for good or ill. So, you have to always be very vigilant of everything in moderation. You can't let yourself be deterred one way or another just because it sounds like a good cause.
Yeah.
That's oftentimes that's the thing. They say that, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So, I could agree to that. But anyway, that's just one last one that just came to mind in terms of significations. But let's see, we can discuss other things now. Let's see. That was most of the questions I had. Other things you've already kind of covered, so maybe there's no reason to repeat that. Huh. Do you want to speak to now, maybe to fill in the bigger picture of the year here, 2025? Since we talked about Venus retrograde,
Yeah.
with Neptune and
Oh,
Rahu
so,
and K2. Now maybe talk
yeah.
about maybe some of the positives. Like, we do have Jupiter going into Cancer still later
Yeah.
on
Thank
June
goodness.
9th. Jupiter,
I am a
yeah,
Cancer and I'm looking forward to that
yeah,
because
yeah. I have
Jupiter
Jupiter
and
in
Gemini.
Cancer, so
Oh, Jupiter return time for you then.
yep, yep.
Great. Yeah.
Very, very much looking
It's
forward to that.
exalted in Cancer, of course. So,
Hmm.
like, Jupiter and Gemini has just been too much of like all of these different crazy things all the time. And you can't relax, you can't focus.
Split in
Um,
attention. Too many
yeah.
tangents, too many threads. Right, right.
So,
Information being overstimulated. There's just too many
yeah.
rabbit holes to go down, and being intentional probably, that people just can't focus on the one thing. I mean, it's yeah, one of the Geminian downsides, you could say. And Gemini has a lot of fabulous qualities. It's a very intelligent sign. It's very curious. It's the eternal student. It knows how to do. multitasking very well. But then with that multitasking, you can end up with a few too many things to try to balance that then really just kind of ends up spreading your energy too thin, right? And so that's what happens with Jupiter. It expands, right? Its nature is to expand. So basically, with information influx, basically it kind of goes all over the place, and it's not able to like actually harness in and focus. Whereas the shift to Cancer, maybe we will look at the signification of, well, first coming back to home, to maybe people actually taking things back to their own roots. Let's hope maybe more people becoming interested in their ancestry and where they actually come from. Maybe that whole unification of the tribe and in a positive sense could be a return of that,
Mm-hmm.
and to those kind of more traditional values, maybe being that cancer is associated with the fourth house, which has to do with these things. It's not the same thing, but it has a tie in there. And then Jupiter has to do also with food and abundance and essentially all those cozy comfort things. So perhaps
Yeah.
that's an
Optimism,
optimism, right? Right.
things that you look forward to. Fertility. Jupiter's connected to fertility.
Well, in
Um,
Cancer, particularly being ruled by the moon, right? So that's definitely
yeah.
right, right.
It's a big Jupiter is a big part of fertility astrology, especially in a man's charts.
Uh-huh. Okay.
But
All right.
the Jupiter in Cancer is the dispositor of Rahu and Pisces. So
Right, right, right.
they're working together. They're both in water signs. People that have fertility problems, if they're resolvable and if you are seeking certain practices, you might be able to really improve your fertility this year because there's a lot of it in the sky.
Okay, very good.
And that's the thing, astrology is used for fertility. There's a specific method. I'm trained in it where you can get, you're more fertile on certain days. For a woman's chart, it's when the lunar phase that you were born under is in effect. You're always going to be more fertile under that. So Jupiter and Cancer potentially for certain signs can be really good for trying to conceive.
Hmm, interesting. What things do you see for the Aries Neptune transition into well, sorry, not Saturn Neptune into Aries? That's
Ugh.
coming a little bit sooner here in March.
Hmm.
That's a kind of a bit of a tricky one,
That
but
is a bit of
being
a tricky one because it's such an odd conjunction to think about. Like Neptune and Aries is odd to think about because the planet is so different from the actual sign. So it can be about, it can have a connection with war. There can be deception about war that is like completely fabricated or fictionalized. Anything is possible now with all of the technology that they have, CGI. They can make anything look real. I don't know what's going on. I'm in Denmark, so we can have deceptions about warfare. Uh, Saturn in Aries, that is a weird one. That's something to think about. Well, for one thing, in the dignities, Saturn is not strong in Aries. I heard people talk about is there going to be a new pandemic? And I
no,
was
it's
thinking,
weakened.
well, it's
It's in its
weakened
fall. Mhm.
because when we had COVID, Saturn was super strong in Aquarius and Capricorn. He's in domicile in those signs, so his power was like so visible with the lockdowns and the rules and
Yeah.
restrictions. But we don't have
Go,
that astrologically this time, so it's not going to be like that.
Going back to what you were talking about the Jupiter Saturn conjunctions, which is kind of what kicked this whole thing off. A positive thing we can note now, Jupiter is going into its exaltation, whereas Saturn is going to be in its fall. So that in
Mm-hmm.
a sense, Jupiter kind of has the upper hand in terms well, it does have the upper hand in dignity scheme wise.
Yeah.
As to does that mean that, things are all going to be great and Jupiter is just going to essentially bless everyone? And no, that's probably not the likely outcome. But how do you see the effect of Neptune being there? Because you have to kind of read them together. Particularly maybe even like going back to like the late 80s, I was born under a Saturn Neptune conjunction, which
Mm-hmm.
was, the fall of the Berlin Wall and certain structures being dissolved.
Yeah.
So now that had to do in Capricorn, which had to do with the establishment. So now it's happening in Aries, has to more do with the person, like the individual. Yeah, so it's maybe
Yeah.
more of an individualist signification.
Yeah.
Dissolve. I
Yeah.
mean, there's different ways to read that, right? Some could say Neptune dissolves individuality entirely, and there's this whole kind of mass formation, all the more so than we've seen, or Saturn actually structuralizes and helps you individuate. I mean,
I think that there is going to be a push for that dissolving of the individual. I think
hmm,
that's already happening, especially when you look at cultures. They want to dissolve the identity of and culture of all the tribes and make them into one big like thing, one big mush with no culture of their own, no heritage, no history, you know. And I think that's so sad because there's so many beautiful tribes in the world that deserve to retain their history. So unfortunately, I think that there is going to be more of that. That's uh, you know, Kali Yuga stuff.
yeah, unfortunate. But we'll just have to see. I mean, again, as you've said, there's always the optimistic, the personal trends and the way it's going to affect a person individually is very different from how it could be on a
Yeah.
collective level. I mean, I
Oh
shouldn't say that.
yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, some people will suffer tremendously, unfortunately, but it's also a
Yeah.
choice which
It's
timeline
a
you allow with.
yeah,
But
you can grow so much through these times. You don't have to stop growing and stop loving yourself just because the government wants you to. You
no, of course
know,
not.
it's your duty not to. So carry on and be happy. That's the biggest act of rebellion that you can do right now.
I agree. Well, Fiona, it looks like we're kind of running out of time. It's been great having
Yeah.
you on. I very much appreciate you being my first guest here. It's been an honor.
It was a real pleasure, and I'm honored that you asked me to be your first guest. Thank you so much, Ezekiel.
Yes. Well, everybody, go check out Fiona Edgar on her Substack, as well as her website, which I believe is fionaedgar.com,
That's right.
and then her YouTube channel as well. Fiona has a new podcast out as well, be called the Moss Wife's Brew,
That's
which is also
right.
very interesting. That deals
Yeah.
with some other things that Fiona is into and teaches, non-astrological. She also works a lot with the runes and ancestral work. So go on over and check that out. And thank you for listening to Wheel of Ezekiel Astrology Podcast. If you'd like to support this work, you can do so with the links below. Also, subscribe either to the free or paid Substack. This may also be made available later on other platforms. So, as I always say, as above, so below, as within, as without.